Russia spent almost $115 billion on the war with Ukraine in a year, and all tanks that were prepared before the invasion were destroyed. The powerful Russian army that scared the world has been almost completely destroyed in the war in Ukraine. Only Russian equipment was destroyed by the Ukrainian armed forces for almost $25 billion. Over the 12 months of the war in Ukraine, not just a huge number of Russian soldiers were killed, but entire armies were destroyed. Armies that had been preparing and arming themselves for decades. Russia no longer has the army that began the full-scale offensive on Ukraine a year ago. It has been replaced by newly mobilized troops, former prisoners, and old equipment taken out of storage. The myth of the invincible second army in the world has been shattered. According to Forbes, Russia spent $114 billion on the war, which is almost $10 billion per month. This is 1/3 of all the revenues of the Russian budget for 2021. This amount only includes direct expenses on the war and does not take into account the economic and indirect losses that Russia has suffered from sanctions and economic isolation. The past few weeks have been catastrophic for Russia in terms of loss of personnel. According to the General Staff of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, 23,680 Russians were eliminated in Ukraine from January 24 to February 24 this year. This is even more than in the first month of the war and 4 times more than Russia's average losses last summer. The increase in the number of troops due to poorly trained mobilized soldiers and former prisoners and ambitious plans for an offensive along the entire front led to a geometric increase in enemy losses. Tanks. Russia invested heavily in its tank armies, trying to create a force that all of Europe would fear. In a year, almost all of these armies will remain in Ukraine forever. Last fall, it became known that Russia had lost its first tank army, the largest tank military formation in Europe, in the war. In total, the UAF destroyed 3,350 tanks over the 12 months of the war. This is more than Russia had at the beginning of the invasion. The losses were so great that the Russians had to open their long-term storage warehouses.